Thank you very much for this welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, for the Jet, and for Johnny. Thank you for inviting. Where's Johnny? Where's Johnny? There's Johnny. Thank you for inviting me. I really am very pleased to be here. Wow, it's nice to see so many people coming out on a Saturday morning. I really respect you after especially all of the festivities, and I understand it was a long evening yesterday. Conference, pre-conference, conference, post-conference, unconference. I hope that this part is exactly what our speakers just said, that this will be an opportunity to reflect on what you've been through the last couple of days, and that a chance to digest a bit. Like a good meal, it's time to sit back and think about how to digest all of this and appropriate it. And by focusing on Jesuit higher education, I think we can do this in common. I think also that, as our speakers just said, collaboration is really the aim of this conference, and it's the aim of my talk as well. I hope that when I'm through with my presentation, that you'll have a chance to further collaborate, and we can collaborate on a number of important issues. The 450-year tradition of education by the Society of Jesus has been built on a common understanding that for all these years, that what we are trying to do is help save souls. We want to help people live a full and rich life. And we want to do so by training leaders for those societies. So Jesuit education has always been a bit elitist. It's always been about training leaders. And hopefully, in each age, we ask ourselves seriously, how do we not ignore the leaders that come from those with less than we have? How do we help leaders who come out of their communities, who are able to take charge, who have many talents, but who don't have the same social privileges that many of us have? So we are elitists, but we're elitists about training the kind of people that want to change the world. Our aim is to change the world, and of course that means that we have to take a serious look at that world, and also look at what that world is doing to us. Our society and culture are transforming us as much as we are going to be able to transform them. And I think that's what you have looked at for the last 3 days. How is our society and culture transforming us, especially our learners? Before we can transform society, we should take a serious look at what's happening to young people and the way they are actually both the same, as has been pointed out, but they're also different. I lived with freshmen in college for almost 25 years in a freshman residence hall. And I would say, in many ways, over those 25 years, yes, college freshmen are the same. They're 19-year-olds, they're 18-year-olds, and they do the crazy things that 18 and 19-year-olds do. But I've also seen some big differences. Their ability to socialize has changed quite a bit. The way they socialize has certainly changed. The way they learn is different. The way they process information is different. And the way they become more and more isolated as well as connected is very different than it was just 10, 12 years ago. What are the new frontiers? I liked very much the theme of your conference when I saw what the conference organizers have put together. Because the Jesuits The word frontiers is in our DNA. When the society was started, it was started at the very time when Europe was discovering that there was a vastly big world out there, new cultures, new peoples, new lands, and there was a real spirit of going to the frontiers, of finding out what was happening in the rest of the world. And so Ignatius was probably one of the first leaders of an organization, first CEO, to actually send people out for information and gather information centrally. During his time as general, the last 16 or so years of his life when he was leading the society from his office in Rome, he had traveled his whole society, but then he got elected general, and then his whole life rather, and then he got elected general, and he never traveled again. But during those 16 years in Rome, he wrote over 7,000 letters and received more than 7,000 letters from the frontiers, if you will. To write a letter meant to have to write it several times. It meant to find someone to deliver it. Without a postal system, you had to make sure that you could get this letter to the people that you intended to receive it, and they had to make sure that their letters found their way back to you through ships and through people on foot and so on and so forth. So every letter was a real project. But all those letters became extremely important for Ignatius to understand what was happening globally in the world, and they became quite popular in Europe as people would distribute these letters so that they'd learn what was happening in India, in a place far off called India, or in a new India, a place we eventually called the Americas, and so on, Africa. So the word frontier is really part of the Jesuit thing. It's the Jesuit DNA. And so what is the real frontier today? Obviously, we don't need to discover new lands. Obviously, we have a lot of minorities and a lot of people in very remote parts of the world kind of speaking up, raising their head, calling for recognition. But the real frontier today is an anthropological frontier. What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be and to exist? That is, to be a person and then to live a full, complete life. Technology, which is the application of science to the problems of the world, have really changed many, many ways that we are and who we are and how we act. So technology is changing the way we process information. On my iPhone, I can get in touch with the contents of libraries all over the world. I don't need a library anymore. And students know that since information is so available, that things like memorizing are kind of obsolete. It's interesting that at every Jesuit evening before dinner, when we sit around waiting for the dinner to be served, usually we have a little drink or something, share something, some little cocktail food. We often talk about Jesuits and where they are and so on and so forth. Or we talk about some issue that's going on in town. It used to be that we could debate these issues. Where was this Jesuit 20 years ago? When did he die? Or what was this in the newspaper today? Or what was going on down the street? But all the arguments are settled now by someone taking out an iPhone and giving you the answer. We no longer need to worry about debating anymore because somebody in the room's got an iPhone and we know how to find the quote-unquote truth. So it's changed the way we process information. It's changed the way we think. We know from research on young people that actually different parts of the brain are developing quicker than other parts of the brain as compared to children in the past. The way they do hand-eye coordination and the way that's triggering and developing their brains is really quite different. I sat in the plane here across from me on the next aisle were two young boys. They must have been 4 years old. And one of the boys was playing games on this computer, and the other one was actually reading. So a 4-year-old, I suspected they were 4, maybe they were 5, maybe they had started school, but pretty adept at managing their two little iPads. That's a very different kid than the kids of the past. The way we communicate. Think about all of the ways in which we communicate. Every shallow idea that anyone has is now tweeted, including even presidents of countries tweet their shallow insights. So we are presented with this incredible amount of information that's often undigested, uncritically formed, and the glut alone is enough, to make you turn off your iPad and your iPhone. But the way we communicate is really changed things. Think of, for example, again, I was thinking about this on the way here. Think of what the section of an airport would be like, where there are arrivals and people are coming to pick people up. Think of what that would be like if we did not have iPhones. There is some order in those arrival places because people can communicate when they're arriving, where they're standing, and so on and so forth. Think of what it would be like if we did not have this. The entire idea of flying and the easy access is all part of our lifestyle today. It's all because of technology. The way we behave and socialize is different. What we do with our time is different. The way we work. Things are more efficient, but they're also much less human. We go out of our way now in the workplace to socialize, where work was a social experience. Work is now so much connected to our technology that we often have to stop and figure out ways in which we're going to communicate as an office or as a group, as human beings to one another. And one of the biggest changes and one of the biggest impacts, I think, is that access now to technology is becoming a serious divider between the haves and the have-nots in the world. Those without access are the poor, and they stay poor. And those with access can figure out a way out. When I was in Lima, going up to the barrios that surround the city, I noticed as we left the area of the city that had been developed and we're moving into these actual shanty towns and cardboard villages that people had put up, there was a wire that was connected to this little corner store, and the person in the store was selling just small things, cookies and candies and a few things. And I saw the wire, and then I saw the word internet. And I asked the Jesuit who was taking us to see one of our Fe Alegria schools, I said, can the kids afford that internet? Because that must be one of the businesses coming out of this little shack. He said, all of the hundreds and hundreds of young people that live on this hillside here, they work in town selling chiclets and selling anything. They work in town to get a few coins to be able to go on the internet. And I said, well, what do they do on the internet? He said, they have Facebook pages and they have identities. And the identity is nothing to do with who they are. They have to fake an identity to communicate, in this case, because it was Spanish-speaking Lima kids. They communicate with Spanish kids in other parts of the world, especially Spain, Brazil, and so on. They would communicate with them and give a false identity so that they would appear to be someone who is part of the haves and not someone who, in reality, who is part of the have-nots with almost no but very little access to the internet. What are the results? Well, young people, as you know very well, have always been easily distracted. I think it's even more difficult. I'm not telling any of you teachers anything new. More difficult, they're more easily distracted. They also feel alienated and rushed. We have more young people talking about stress. Everything in their life is stressful. And they're constantly talking about needing to unstress, they're too stressed out to do things, and they need to take care of themselves and so on. They're overstimulated, overloaded, and they're unsure of their future. The rapidity of change in their world is such that while their social position, their education might well suit them for a secure future, should suit them for a secure future, the glut of information about the chaos in the world actually produces more insecurity than we've ever seen before. More young people with psychological problems than we've ever had. So what's the antidote? How do we prepare young people for a different future? Well, I think first we have to accept that technology is not the enemy, but like all inventions that transform our way of living, it has to be wedded to a deeper wisdom which we find in the humanities. That's almost an exact quote from Stephen Jobs, founder of Apple. It was him who said in a speech at Harvard, he's the one that said, actually, technology will be a very dangerous tool in our toolbox if we don't wed this with the humanities. So the importance of the humanities in our schools, high schools and colleges, universities, is critical today more than ever, because in the humanities we find the wisdom of the past. In the humanities we find what truth and what beauty and what goodness are all about. As the Greeks said, those are the three things, the three values that humanize us. The search for truth, the search for beauty, and the search for good. What is the good? So we need to be sure that we're teaching kids broadly with the humanities. And that ancient, old Jesuit tradition of preserving humanities is critical. I would say that every school, no matter how technologically oriented it is, ought to be very careful about how it's giving people a very broad education in literature, in science, in the arts. The Jesuit answer is found then in both looking to the past and looking to the future. Students need breadth of knowledge, but equally depth and discernment. We need to prepare a generation of young people with the capacity for a deeper look at issues and problems with the tools of discernment and a new sense of global citizenship. Jesuit schools were founded since Messina back in 1558. I think it was 1558. It might be a year or two off there. What year is it? 48. Thank you. Since the founding of the schools, we have been interested in preparing people for citizenship for the city. We need to prepare them for citizenship for the globe, for the world, a different kind of citizenship altogether. What's the fully developed then young man or woman from the Catholic Jesuit institution look like? He's a critical, or she's a critical thinker, capable of taking various points of view. You can't be a critical thinker and take various points of view unless you know something. If you teach young people, you know that they like to tell you whatever comes to the top of their head without thinking, and they like to repeat what they've heard somebody else say. But for them to think means they have to look carefully and know something. They have to be able to organize, plan, and execute a task in an efficient manner. And that's what the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm is about. How do you organize, plan, execute a task in an efficient manner, and self-monitor? How am I doing? How are we doing? Able to weigh and discern the moral consequences of every course of action. This is increasingly difficult in a world of untruth. A world of untruth says that opinions are gold, opinions are your own, and they're your truth. And the promise of that, as Paul Ricoeur said, the promise of that is that you always live with the uncertainty you may be completely wrong in your certainty. That is, you may be convinced that you know what's right because that's what you believe, but the problem is that you're always left with the issue of uncertainty. I may not be right. Able to appreciate the slow process of real achievements. Solving problems in a community, in a family, in the world, takes a deliberate, slow, and gradual effort of application that is constant over sometimes not months or days, but over years, over decades. Convinced that something greater than him or herself is at work in our efforts. This is the faith. This is another way of saying what Ledesma and Koldenbach have stressed when we're talking about people of compassion, people of commitment, people who are competent, people who care. It's another way of saying those. I think that these 5 attributes are in fact a new way of saying what kind of a person we really need to produce. So down the road, what are we preparing young people for? Well, we're preparing them for a world that is more chaotic politically, with unfortunately less faith in liberal democracy. The leaders we need to produce are people who understand the sloppiness and the difficulty of a liberal democracy, but that it's the only way to guard against autocracies and authoritarian governments and the loss of freedoms. And it seems to me now we are in a very precarious age throughout Asia and the West. We see people toying with the idea is liberal democracy efficient enough to withstand the pressures of managing our global problems. A world that is less sure of its moral underpinnings. When people can believe in anything, they believe in anything. When people believe in nothing, they can be talked into anything. And we have a world in which faith and morals are loose, in which they're poorly moored and not very well grounded in strong religious and philosophical traditions. So leaders who ignore human rights, official corruption, and the failing institutions around them. A world where there is more diversity and the changing codes of conduct that come with that. Various minorities, for example, seek their own rights, and religious minorities are often political pawns. What we see in some countries, too many countries, in the so-called liberal West, even in so-called democratic societies, is the use of religion to sway people, use of majority religion to sway people against minorities. And we have many examples here in Asia. We've seen it in the United States. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We certainly see it. And a world that has a dubious environmental future. where we see the effects of climate change and environmental degradation. So that's the world down the road for these leaders. So the Society of Jesus, in reflecting on its most recent statement on our mission in the world as a mission of reconciliation and faith, putting out a decree 2 years ago at our recent general congregation. Those involved in education, especially our board, reflected on that document and extracted from that 6 priority issues that our institutions should concentrate on in order to prepare young people for that world down the road or on the road. So we selected the following important 6 priorities for our schools. And perfectly evident here in this conference, your organizers were perfectly aware that these are the key issues, and we see this throughout your own planning. But we need to form our own leaders, our administrators and our faculty in the Ignatian tradition. What is it that we're trying to do with the formation of leaders? What is it that our leaders need to know and to have in order to be able to give? Formation of our students to be civic and political leaders in a globalized world. This is perhaps Father Arturo Sosa, the President General. That's probably his chief concern, that our schools become agents of forming leaders for this new global world. He's a Venezuelan, and he sees there that it's the political leaders that have basically destroyed the country. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the country is being completely destroyed by the present leadership. Leaders will always want power and want more power unless there are citizen leaders and others to replace them who understand the limits of power and the need for the common good. We have a world in which interreligious dialogue and understanding is urgently needed, so that we cannot, these issues cannot be used to the advantage of some and the detriment of others. Economic and environmental justice is our 4th theme. Clearly that there's enough research about this, and Laudato Si is our kind of charter for Pope's recent encyclical. Laudato Si is our charter for what should be happening. How do we create schools that promote the agenda that is in that particular document? We want to educate the marginalized. We need to reach out to more places where there's a hunger for learning, a desire to really become part of the global society, and how do we reach them? How do we reach those folks? We have a program called Jesuit Worldwide Learning, in which we actually go into refugee camps. We go into very war-torn countries that as soon as the war has stopped, we'll be moving into Syria as soon as that's over. We're in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We need to go to even places that are not necessarily war-torn, but places with a lot of social strife, where people are fleeing. The very notion of 50 million refugees, at minimum 50 million and more migrants, is really stunning, and it's the largest percent of people on the move, largest numbers of people on the move since World War II. And finally, peace and reconciliation. We need to understand more about how the university can be the home for sides to come together. Just think of, for example, if we're going to solve economic and environmental problems, university is the last place that can call people from both sides of the problem. The people that are affected by the problems of environmental degradation and the people whose businesses promote environmental degradation. they're often educated in our schools, in fact. Is the university a place? It's not government with its agenda. It's not corporate leadership with its agenda. It's not even church. It's not even church, but it's a neutral place where both sides could come together to look at how to solve problems. Could the Ateneo, for example, be the home, be the place where industry, politics, and environmental concerns come together to talk about solutions that will take decades, but that could be starting here and now with dialogue. So those are our priorities, and we took those from our own document, which is, as I said, Decree 1, GC 36. The mission of society is peace, is reconciliation and justice. So we're asking ourselves today, can this global network of schools, can this have an impact if we all collaborate and join together? There are about 8,000 schools, when you add Fe y Alegría, that the Society of Jesus sponsored. 200 of those are higher education institutions, post-secondary or tertiary institutions. That is perhaps the largest network of schools in the world. It's the only global network that reaches into 64 countries, any hundreds and hundreds, thousands of communities. And is it possible that if we all worked together on certain things, that we could in fact make a real impact over the years? We've not thought about ourselves that way as a social force for changing, transforming society. So what then is teaching for a different future? Well, I think it's creating, whether it's the secondary school or the tertiary school, I think it's creating a school culture. Obviously, content is critical. We have to give students real knowledge of subjects. Politics, science, you name it, and it's always been our hallmark. We teach well. We produce well-educated students when it comes to the content in their brains. But it's the culture, it's the ambiance of the school that we're more interested in now. Often governments have a lot to say with what you teach and how you teach and when you teach. But the school culture is something in our hands, whether it's a state-operated school that we're taking charge of or whether it's a private institution. Do we teach discernment skills to our young people? You know what discernment is, Jesuit discernment is about. Just really briefly, and the experts in the room should correct me. But it's about taking all sides, learning to speak for something and learning to speak against it, learning to take one point of view and learning to take the other. And then in the dialogue and in the discussion with others, it's learning to look at what happens to us when we discern, when we argue, when we take different positions. What happens to us? Where do we feel drawn? How do we change over time? Discernment also means paying attention then not to just what you think, but what you feel about what you think. And then testing your feelings and your thoughts with others. Why do others feel differently? Why do others think differently? What could be the source of that? And then if we're going to move towards a decision, what are the moral consequences of that decision? Who wins, who loses? Is it possible that everyone could win? What would that look like? And how much better would we feel if in fact we came up with solutions in which everyone felt a part of the solution, part of the answer? That process takes time. It runs against the grain of the way a lot of young people operate today. Discerning where I go, discerning how I use my time, discerning who I'm with. Those are also parts of discernment process, not just discerning how we solve the pollution problem, the water problems in our community, but discerning my own life and my own direction. Do we have a school that really teaches that? Do we teach interfaith understanding? Almost every school, in fact, I don't know a school that has only one religious group. All of our schools are interfaith schools. Teachers, administrators, and students are from different faiths. It's the perfect laboratory for putting interfaith issues on record, on top, to be discussed. How do we, from our different faith backgrounds, look at a problem? And where is that in our faith tradition? Getting students to be articulate about their faith tradition, proud of their faith tradition, and able to understand someone else's faith tradition, we have the perfect lab for that. Teaching economic justice and respect for the environment. What is the school doing itself to show respect for the environment? If you ask students what we should be doing here on this campus, in this building, they'll come up with a lot of suggestions. They'll come up with a lot of ideas because they're probably more aware of the fact that they're going to inherit what's left of our environment than we are. How do we teach inclusion and appreciation of diversity? Many of our schools have a dominant social group, dominant ethnic group, a dominant perhaps religious group as well. Service learning is perhaps the best way to go out there and to find the other, to find real diversity, to find the people who don't have the privilege of coming to get an education like the education we're getting. Do we teach leadership skills based on the Catholic notion of the common good and a new understanding of global citizenship? I think these are two things we have to study more. What does it mean to teach the common good, and what does it mean to teach global citizenship? I'm not sure that we know quite what that is. So we're asking, how does a school become an agent of reconciliation? Because this is the heart of the gospel message. A service and a community building place, because this is the example of Jesus. A place of moral discernment because of our commitment to faith and reason, and continuous education. Teachers need continuous education, and they need continuous support. And so do our students, and so do our alumni. Is there a way in which the school can become a community of people coming back to learn? We have parents who drop into the building regularly, or in university outreach to the community and to our alumni. Those, I think, are increasingly more important because no one who is educated today is educated for the kind of future that we are anticipating or perhaps not even aware of coming down the road. I just want to end with a note here, an encouragement. After our break, we'll have a discussion now, but then after our break, you have breakout sessions, collaboration sessions. Couldn't have planned this better myself. These topics will offer you a chance to do the kind of collaboration and exactly on these issues that I'm talking about that are of concern to us as Jesuit educators. We need to think about how would we research among ourselves what are the best practices What are we already doing that's really working? We need to share those best practices. So we begin with our own experience in these areas. Then we look at what works in these 5 different areas. We know leadership is critical. Who are the leaders? Who takes responsibility? How should we prepare leaders to take responsibility? Then what are the means that we're going to use? And finally, how do we develop one another in these areas? The topics are perfect for this. And you don't need to look at research done elsewhere. You don't need to look at what the literature says. Ben Everest and I were talking about this. Too many of us think that the answers come from abroad. The answers are probably here in this room. Some of you are doing excellent work in one area. You're doing wonderful things in this kind of a program. And we haven't paid much attention to some other areas that we should pay attention to. Or we've got some things going, but we really need to expand those things. How would we expand? How would we scale those things? We can learn from one another. We can collaborate on the research among ourselves, and we could promote better schools by the work we do together, work that we collaborate on ourselves. We don't need to look for best practices elsewhere. Wonderful programs that are overseas and far away. We can do this on our own. So I want to leave you with that word of encouragement that this is a great opportunity for you to start thinking globally, certainly regionally, but start to think about the fact that this could be an extremely powerful network that will raise the bar here, raise the caliber of your schools to be exactly those kinds of agents, this kind of an agent, the schools that are reconciling, serving, discerning, and continuously educating. So thank you very much for this invitation. And what I'd like to do, if I can, is ask you to talk with one another for a couple minutes. We'll just take 3 minutes, talk with one another. What did you hear that you liked, or what did you think is unclear? What would you like to know more about, or what kind of questions would you like to ask? And then we'll have a discussion, because we'll have a half hour for that. So go ahead and talk.